What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. On this weekly one-shot, we're going to be talking about the Man in Black, Venom himself. So this is going to be the history and evolution of the character, both in artistic as well as in storyline format. So let's start off with the origin of the black suit. So the black suit made its first appearance in May of 1984 in Amazing Spider-Man 252, the story entitled Homecoming, which was really the return from the Secret Wars event, which we really didn't see the conclusion of or the actual attainment of the black suit until Secret Wars number 8, where Spider-Man kind of went to a prison. He had torn his suit as part of the battle on Battleworld, and ultimately reclaimed this black suit, which kind of absorbed itself. It surrounded him, becoming the distinctive black suit that we know today. After a few issues of him palling around in this suit, really it became a situation where he wasn't really in control of this. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, it was a parasitic alien life form that would feed on the adrenaline of the user, and occasionally it would take Peter Parker's body out for a ride and Spider-Man while he wasn't even conscious. In Amazing Spider-Man 258, Peter Parker goes to consult Reed Richards and the rest of the Fantastic Four to find out what it is, and after some careful analysis, Reed Richards determines that it's alive. And when Peter tries to take this suit off, it ultimately tries to constrict him and really control his movements until Reed Richards hits him with the sonic ray gun. And not only does this result in the actual symbiote escaping off of Spider-Man's body and being encapsulated by the Fantastic Four, but also the introduction of one of the coolest Spider-Man suits ever, Baghead Spider-Man in a Fantastic Four suit. But we're talking about Venom here. What we find out is that later on in Web of Spider-Man, the symbiote has escaped from the Fantastic Four, sought out Peter Parker, rebonded to it, and is looking to take revenge. So in an act of desperation, Peter jumps into a local church as the bells are ringing, and the sonic blasts cause the actual symbiote to separate from Peter and drip down into the darkness. What we don't know at that point in time is that that would later bond to disgraced reporter Eddie Brock. So what we find is that Eddie had just done an article on the Sin Eater, and this is off of a Peter David run back in 1985. He had done that article, and then immediately afterwards, Spider-Man had solved the case and found that Eddie Brock was wrong. Disgraced as a journalist, he was forced to write, very trashy kind of stuff for tabloid journals. And because of that, he's focused all of his energy and rage into bodybuilding as well as taking his revenge on Spider-Man. And what we find is that as he's kind of contemplating suicide, he is actually in the exact same church that Spider-Man loses the symbiote in, and it bonds to him, creating Venom. And this leads to Venom's first cameo in Amazing Spider-Man 299 and his first full appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 300, both issues written by David Michelinie and art by Todd McFarlane. So this is where we get the distinctive look and feel for Venom. This is going to be the genesis. This is what everybody is going to base their interpretations of Venom off for probably the next 15 years. And that's really interesting because as we go through the Todd McFarlane run, Venom makes a few appearances, and really it becomes Eric Larson who takes the real baton and runs with it and creates a little bit more distinct version of Venom. While Venom was a very bulky individual, that was because Eddie Brock was a very large, muscular man, and his jawline was extended, very serious teeth, but it was later Eric Larson that added the drool and the very liquid kind of appearance, the long tongue that became a very distinct look for Venom. This continued on until about Amazing Spider-Man 361. Previously, Eddie Brock had been imprisoned and was rooming with Cletus Cassidy. And in Amazing Spider-Man 361, we see the origin of Carnage, but that's a different video all on its own. After his escape from prison and eventually helping in the Maximum Carnage saga, Eddie Brock kind of takes on this whole persona of a potential lethal protector, because that's one of the series that he started on his own. He'd had a short-term career as a vigilante, but ultimately just kind of stuck around in the background for a period of time, occasionally being separated from the symbiote and then returning as Venom. That is until he was diagnosed with cancer. With the symbiote no longer wanting to be bonded to a diseased host, as well as its increasing bloodlust, Eddie Brock is forced to auction off the actual symbiote, and it goes for like $200 million, and it's purchased by this crime lord. So at that point in time, we see Angelo Fortunato, the son of that crime lord, take on the role of Venom for like 2 issues, and this is in Marvel Knights Spider-Man. And then we actually see it transition over to Mac Gargan, and this is where we actually get the first real separation and the first real enhancement of physical abilities that's caused by the Venom symbiote. So at this point in time, Venom does have a little bit more fluid influence, and that's based off the creation of Carnage and the interpretation of Carnage and Venom by Mark Bagley. But now we see a completely different style that's associated with the Fortunato and Gargan version of Venom, and then he slowly gets bigger and bulkier and more physically intimidating. And we find that this is because Mac Gargan himself is dominated by the Venom symbiote and is kind of got this matter-changing property. So he's earned the ability to kind of manipulate various things, but ultimately he can manifest a physical tail because Mac Gargan used to be the Scorpion, and increase his physical size, almost becoming a Hulk-like figure. It's grotesque and intense at the same time. Because of the domineering of Mac Gargan by the Venom symbiote, he turns to cannibalism, occasionally being like out on the prowl for prostitutes to eat. It's really an odd sight as Venom kind of goes through the phase of being on the Thunderbolts, part of the Sinister 12, as well as his role in the Dark Avengers. But we actually see Mac Gargan lose the symbiote as the Dark Avengers are captured and brought into government custody. He's forcefully separated, and then the government takes possession of that Venom symbiote. With the government now in control of the Venom symbiote, they are looking to create another super soldier in the vein of Captain America, but one that they can control a little bit more considerably. So one of the candidates happens to be Flash Thompson. A person from Spider-Man's history always has to end up with a symbiote, so what we see is Flash Thompson is a perfect candidate, and as a kind of double amputee from his military history, he's got a great record, great personality, and can really adapt to the symbiote, and it allows him to regrow his legs and maintain full functionality and generate powers on the level of Spider-Man himself. When Flash Thompson takes possession of the Venom symbiote, there's a distinct change in style as well, which goes much more militaristic, much more streamlined, much more stealth, and this is really embodied in the Venom run by Rick Remender. I really enjoy this particular version because it shows that Flash Thompson, with the aid of a few, inhibiting drugs, as well as his sheer willpower, can take control of this bloodlust-based symbiote. However, you do get this kind of duality. What you see is that this very controlled military-style Venom is always present. However, when he loses control, when he gives in a little bit to those impulses, he slowly builds into physical size. That changes. He gets a little bit more bulky, gets a little bit more nasty, gets a little bit more liquidy, gets a little bit more like the Mac Gargan, Eddie Brock style Venom. So that's a really cool kind of duality and characteristic that shows that the symbiote is becoming more of a character. It's not just something that somebody wears, but it's becoming its own personality at that point in time. Over the course of that run, Flash Thompson does lose the Venom symbiote for a short period of time, and it actually bonds itself to the Otto Octavius-controlled Peter Parker body in Superior Spider-Man and becomes Superior Venom, which is another really cool change, but it still maintains similar characteristics to what the Venom symbiote was. However, it does grow a couple extra appendages thanks to Otto Octavius' mental picture of how Venom should be. After regaining the symbiote, we see him take adventures all over space as a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. However, as soon as he leaves Earth's atmosphere, he reconnects to a mental cosmic kind of structure, which is causing some very serious issues with the actual symbiote itself. These callings get much stronger and stronger and stronger until later on in Guardians of the Galaxy, approximately issue 2021, he gets almost completely dominated by this Venom symbiote and is ultimately saved by Gamora, who puts him back onto the Guardian spaceship, and each of the members take a turn being possessed by the symbiote itself as they return to their home planet. This is where Brian Michael Bendis not only changes the look of Venom, he also changes the backstory of the Venom symbiote itself. So the Clintar race, the aliens that are actually the embodiment of this symbiote, they are actually supposed to be agents of the cosmos that are looking for the perfect host in order to actually create a better society, in order to improve the lives of everyone else. This is also where we see some new powers being bestowed on Venom itself. Because the original host of this Clintar was a relatively evil person before it became the possession of Spider-Man, it really corrupted the actual personality of it, and it got disconnected from the hive mind when it was imprisoned and later went back to Earth. But as it actually regained consciousness inside space, it went home and ultimately could reconnect with the other members of its species, thus cleansing it of the actual pain and suffering and hurt and corruption that had been caused over the many years of being in the possession of Eddie Brock, Mac Gargan, as well as the remainder of its original host. So now, in a much clearer frame of mind, Flash Thompson is an agent of the cosmos. And that's where we lead into Venom Space Knight. Not only does he have the hive mind capabilities in order to communicate with the rest of the Clintar, but he hears the voice of the cosmos, which directs him to people that need the most help, as well as the ability to take on its own humanoid shape. So not only can Flash be outside the symbiote, but the symbiote can take on its own form in order to survive or take on whatever tasks it really needs to. And this brings us to our final host, who's Lee Price. So Lee Price is an ex-Army Ranger that doesn't have two fingers on his left hand. Overall, he's got a very morally gray sensibility, and he's very flexible when it comes to the situations. He's not opposed to taking the life of another individual, but he's really kind of flippant and doesn't really care about those situations. However, he does know an opportunity when he sees one. So in the events of Venom #1, we actually see the Clintar, who has been separated from Flash Thompson for some reason that hasn't been disclosed yet, go and try to find a new host. Ultimately, it bonds with a homeless man before actually finding Lee Price and becoming the new Venom. And this is going to be a very interesting take on the Venom symbiote, because now it is essentially a character unto its own. It can possess its own form, it has its own consciousness, it can connect to the rest of its species, and it's been cleansed of all its corruption previously. So it's an inherently a good thing. It wants to do better. It wants to improve the lives of other people. And when you have this morally gray kind of individual taking possession of it that has his own motivations, has his own goals, and doesn't necessarily want to follow the will of the symbiote or be a partner in this aspect, it's going to make for a very interesting conflict and dynamic between those two. As for the powers of the symbiote itself, it has the ability to enhance the strength of an individual when it's being used as kind of a suit. So it can lift up to 70 tons and it can possibly enhance strength even further than that. Not only does it do that, it gives you superhuman durability as well as an advanced healing factor. It can detect its own offspring, so Carnage, Mania, and other symbiotes that have been generated from Venom can obviously be detected by that symbiote. It can generate its own organic webbing. Not only does it have the webbing, but it also has the spider sense that's associated with Spider-Man, so it can detect blows before they ever happen. It can also shapeshift and take on the form of clothing as well as other things. It also has the ability to manipulate matter and create things like spikes and blades and those other kind of things, as it also did with Mac Gargan and his tail. And finally, the superpower that it really just got recently is the ability to create that humanoid shape and to move about on its own. So that's the history and evolution of Venom as a character. Not only has he changed visually over the years, but he's also added new powers and developed a personality all his own. But I want to know what you guys think, so hit me up in the comments down below, and we can start that conversation about one of the most memorable Spider-Man villains of all time. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe right there to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.